going to see a new topic called kernel. So you might have seen this particular topic in the previous classes that I talk about kernel, what is the kernel and how it is related to the operating system that we'll see today. So what we know about operating system till now. So we know that this operating system is some sort of system software that manages computer hardware and software resources and provide common service for computer programs. So that is the work of the operating system. It manages our computer hardware and other software resources. So as well as it provides the services for the computer programs. So what are the services that is there, like for the computer programs? It will provide, like if a computer program need the IO device, so it will provide those IO devices. If a computer program need a platform to run, it will provide a platform for that. Or if a computer program need to process, it will give the resources like RAM. First, it will be given to the RAM, that is your main memory, and from the main memory, your program will be reached to the CPU, and in CPU processing will be done, and again come back and given the result into the console. So all these management and all these resource allocations will be done by the operating system. And these operating system, we say it is a system software. We cannot say it is an application software, because application software, we know what is application software is. So the application softwares are, let's say you have purchased a new laptop, and in that particular new laptop, we find out that we have essential software which is related to the operating system, and then we have to install, let's say if we want that I want Microsoft Word or this Microsoft Office to install, so I'll install Microsoft Office. If let's say I need another type of browser, so I'll install other type of browsers other than the operating system specific browser. Let's say I want to install some sort of media player. Let's say I want to install some sort of system software which may connect to my printer, right? So all those applications, software that we have to install, and different device driver we have to install for using. So that is other type of software. The operating system, generally it is called system software, okay? Because actually it manages your computer, it manages your system. So that's why the name is system software. And there is an application software, right? So in the application software, actually we interact directly with the application software. And these application software is a media by which we interact with the hardware through the operating system. So the application software will be interacting with these system software, and these system software will interact with the hardware. This is how the process goes on. So if we'll talk about, we'll go through this later on, the diagram of it, we'll see it. Now the system software, collectively called operating system, which manages your computer. That is that we know from this particular definition, that what is an operating system. So an operating system is nothing but system software that manages computers, hardware, software resources, and provide common services for computer programs. Now let's go to the kernel. That what is a kernel? Kernel is the most internal services are provided by the kernel. Now what do you mean by internal services? So the meaning of internal services are, let's say if a program need the platform, or program need some resources to run, so these resources will be provided by the kernel. If two processes want to communicate with each other, inter-process communication, that is also done by the kernel. If program need to be load into the main memory. So the management of the main memory, that is also done by the kernel. So these are internal services that is done by the kernels, and these internal services contain most important operating system processing functions. So we know what operating system will do and the kernel will do. So that's why we say, because this kernel is doing most of the internal services work, so we say that this kernel is nothing but core of the operating system, or central module, or the part of the operating system, or central part of the operating system. Because actually there is a kernel which is a part of the operating system which will do all those things: managing resources, managing the CPU, managing different hardware, interact with other hardwares. So all these things will be done by the kernels. Remaining services are provided by other modules, and that module also controlled by the kernel. Remaining services means, let's say we have purchased a new hardware, and let's say we have purchased a scanner, okay, and I want that my system should be connect with the scanner. So what I'll do is I'll connect the scanner and I'll try to install the device driver of the scanner. So this device driver is not the part of the operating system, right? This device driver is an external software that we have installed. And so this device driver is also doing the services, internal services, because it is a hardware. And that could not be done by the kernel. But yes, kernel will manages it. Kernel manages uh, all these device drivers, what we have. If it is not the part of the operating system, if we are installing it outside the operating system, so definitely kernel will manage all those different modules or different device drivers that we install. So what is the definition of the kernel? So with the aid of firmware and device driver, with the aid of, right, firmware and device driver, the kernel provide the most basic level of control over all the computer hardware devices. It manages memory access for program in the RAM. It determines which program get access to which hardware resources. It sets up or reset CPU operating state for optimal operation at all time, and it organizes the data for long-term non-volatile storage with file systems on such media such as disk, tape, flash memory, and all. Now, what it will do? So it is written here what it will do. So with the add of firmware and device driver, what is the meaning of firmware? So firmware is a sort of software or sort of dedicated software that is attached to a specific hardware, that is called firmware. Like if we'll take an example of a remote control. So remote control is a hardware, right? And there are many buttons in the remote control, but that remote control will be run by some sort of software, and that software is called firmware. This The firmware is nothing but it attached with a specific hardware, just like your embedded system. So what is an embedded system? There is a hardware and the dedicated software to that hardware. If we are making a combination of hardware and the dedicated software related to the hardware, that is called embedded system. And this firmware is also is the software of that particular hardware. Device drivers, we know what is device driver. Device drivers uh, are the software which will help to access the hardware, and it has all the functionality related to the hardware. So device driver is also specific to the hardware. So with the add of firmware and device driver, The kernel provides the most basic level of control over all the computer hardwares, right? All the computer hardware. So we have internal hardware, which will be managed by the firmware, and we have external hardware, which will be managed by the device drivers. So both will be managed by the kernel. So kernel will decide that which particular device driver has to call at what particular time, and which particular process has to be served by these hardware. So it is managed by that. So it manages memory access for program in the RAM also. In the main memory, uh, how this program be used will be using the memory access. That is also done by the kernel. It determines which program get access to which hardware resources, right? Hardware resources like your RAM is a hardware, right? So how this program will get the RAM, how this program will get the CPU, all these will be managed by the kernel. It set up or reset the CPU operating state. There are mainly two states of CPU. One is state that CPU work in a user mode or CPU work in a supervisor mode. So there are two modes, user mode and supervisor mode. And to manage these two modes, there is an interface called kernel mode. Okay, and through the kernel only, the CPU will be deciding that in which mode it is going to run, whether it is running in the user mode or it is running in the supervisor mode. So when okay, we'll see what is different modes are. Here we'll not discuss it. It organizes the data for long-term non-volatile storage. Means it manages the data also in the hard drives or in the your solid state drive or your uh, pen drive, flash memory, or your tapes, right? Through the help of file systems. So we know that every operating system is related to some sort of file systems, that how we are going to manage the directory and how we are going to manage the files. So that is also done by the managed by the kernel. Let's go to different services related to the kernel. So the first service which is related to the kernel is program execution and process management. How a program is going to execute in the system, means with the help of these CPU, with the help of these RAM, how it will be done, as well as how this program is going to execute. So both the thing will be done by the kernel. Then we have a concept of interrupt handling. We'll see in the in upcoming classes. Maybe in the next topic, we'll learn about the interrupt. There are different type of interrupt that will be managed by the kernel only. Uh, Different type of interrupt means we have hardware interrupt and we have software interrupt. The interrupt caused by the hardware means, let's say with the keystroke or with the mouse stroke, if you are sending some signals like we have seen in the register, we have IO register. So this IO register is for hardware interrupt. Or we have software interrupt. Any software is looking for any, let's say, if we are having a software and we are making a software which is taking the input from the user. So what will happen is the software will run and suddenly it will be interrupted and it need the console. So what CPU will do? CPU will see that this particular, right now there is a printf statement. So right now we have to provide the hardware to it. So that type of interrupt is called software interrupt. We'll see in detail different type of hardware interrupt and different type of software interrupt and how this kernel is going to manage it. Then kernel will manage the modes also. Just now I told you we have two type of mode in the CPU. We have user mode and we have supervisor mode. This supervisor mode will be used when we are running any system software. It means any program related to the operating system. So at that particular time, we have to change the mode to supervisor mode. And there is a user mode. User mode means in the user mode, user will have the control and it will run their softwares, application softwares in the user mode. So these two are the mode of the CPU, and the interface, or you can say the uh, bridge between user mode to change to the supervisory mode, it will be done by the kernel. Memory management, here it is talking about RAM, random access memory management, how it will be done. Then there is a concept of virtual memory. What is a virtual memory? Virtual, we know that it is not real, right? It is not physical. So let's say we have 4 GB of memory and my program need, let's say, 8 GB of memory. Can we serve it? So yes, with the help of operating system, which has the capacity of the kernel to manage that, we can run even 8 GB of program with 4 GB of RAM. Because with the von Neumann architecture, we know that every program should be there in the main memory, right? So if a program is of 8 GB, how we can accommodate in 4 GB? That concept will be taken by the virtual memory. So we'll make a feel to the user that your 8 GB is also accommodated by my 4 GB RAM, because there is a concept of you can say demand paging. So whenever we need some sort of page from the program, we just get it from the secondary memory to the main memory, and that will be done very fast, and that will be managed by the kernel. So all the program we doesn't have to put into the RAM. Instead, we'll put the portion of the program which is required right now. So that concept is called virtual memory. Means user will feel that there are enough memory is there with the program to manage. Then there is a concept of multitasking. That is a part of process management, that how multiple process will be managed and multiple tasks would be done. And it is also a part of CPU management, that how a CPU will be managed in such a way so that multiple tasks will be run into the CPU. That is also done by the kernel. Then there is a disk access and file system management. We know that every operating system has different file system. We know Windows, previously we have FAT32, right? And then in the Windows there is NTFS. If we'll talk about Linux, there are X83, 86 type of file systems, and that is called VX6 file system. So all those are different type of file system which are there with different operating system, and these operating system will manage those file system. File system is nothing but a provision in which how we are managing the directories and how we are managing the files will be taken care by the kernel. What are the kernel usage? We have seen that, but just will revise it. It will allocate space to the program which needed, where it will allocate the resource space in the RAM, in the main memory. Okay, in the main memory, it is going to give the spaces to the program. Schedule time to execute the application, it will manage the CPU. How CPU will be scheduled by these applications. Provide communication between program that has been taken. That concept is called inter-process communication, IPC. That how two program can communicate to each other. Program security to other module and the services. Will provide the security to the program modules and different services, and that security provision will be done by the kernel, that which particular program will run in which particular mode, that will be done by the kernel only.